Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and welcome to This Week in Mythic Plus. This week's affixes are Fortified, Inspiring, Grievous, and of course, Tormented. Compared to the other weeks we've had recently, this one is a little bit more rough. It's not the worst week on the calendar, but it's definitely a step up in difficulty compared to last Fortified week. And then it's obviously Fortified instead of Tyrannical compared to last week, which is, mixed bag, but the affixes that aren't in that row are definitely tougher, right? Compared to Raging Volcanic. Inspiring and Grievous, both of these can be pretty tough. So a lot of pressure on the healer this week with the Grievous affix and with Inspiring letting mobs free cast and do stuff without being crowd controllable. Look out for just random deaths across members of your group. Look for specs and choices you can make within your spec that will make you a little bit more tanky, a little bit more sustain, and then use those buttons aggressively. Buttons like Health Potion, really good this week. All sorts of things like that. Active use of shield wall type effects, small defensives, as damage is incoming onto you is going to be really, really helpful. So for those who don't know as well, Mythic Dungeon Tools, the add-on we're using here, and the one you'll need if you want my routes, which are available every week on Raider.io, and you can find in the description below, actually marks the inspiring mobs as well. So if you, it's a little bit harder to see when you're in a route that's already got stuff marked, but an easy way to do it is just to go to any empty route, set the week to an inspiring week, and it will show you the yellow highlight around each of the mobs that are inspiring, plus that inspiring aura. And so you can do this before starting your dungeon and come up with a plan for how you want to attack each of these pulls. Most of them offer usually, a straightforward way of approaching them. The main ways of dealing with inspiring are crowd controlling the inspiring mob and killing it later, focusing down the inspiring mob, or doing something fancy. And doing something fancy is actually, for instance, on this pull here in DOS, is usually a pretty good way to handle this raptor, right? So the problem with this raptor is that it's giving this Death Speaker inspiring. This Death Speaker's a caster, so if you crowd control the raptor, first off, it's undead, so a lot of crowd control doesn't work on it. And then second off, this caster might be just standing in the aura anyways. So what you may want to do here is just kind of kite around, because this thing moves slower than the rest of the pack, in order to keep the Death Speaker out of the inspiring aura of the raptor, while focusing damage on both the raptor and the Death Speaker, and kind of cleaving everything else down. And that's usually one pretty good way to attack this pack, but most packs there's usually something more simple you can do with it. It is worth noting that stuns that come from Covenant abilities in dungeons, so like the Urns in DOS, like in Spires, the Spears that you can pick up, those do not care about inspiring. They'll hit inspiring mobs, they'll hit tormented mobs, they will do all kinds of stuff that kind of breaks the rules of what you can normally stun. So make use of that. Definitely something you can do in DOS, for instance. You can use that on this pull here. You can't interrupt all these guys to get them into line of sight or to get them in range, but you can line of sight them, say back around this little pillar if you want. So that's a good tool to have in your toolkit for these sorts of dungeons that will help out a lot, because particularly on this week, it's a little bit less important on the other inspiring week, because that's a tyrannical week and this is a fortified week, so trash is harder, and this week has that Grievous affix, which just means that the fortified Grievous inspiring combo is inspiring is making free casting happen, and then fortified and Grievous are making it punishing when it does happen. So really do think about that and prepare for it in each of the fights as much as you can. And then the reward is, in theory, that the bosses should be easier, right? Because it's a fortified week instead of tyrannical. But the problem is that actually a lot of boss fights on fortified Grievous, they're not necessarily as hard as the tyrannical versions of the fight, but they're kind of the same difficulty, just a shorter time than those tyrannical fights. But there's actually, Grievous tends to add about as much damage to a boss fight, or probably more in a couple of them, than the tyrannical damage bump does. So definitely make sure you're respecting the boss fights. this week in particular, continue to use the Bloodlust on the hard fights. I mean, in DOS, it's actually kind of rough because the Mana Storms is a fight that I find to be one of the hardest, actually, Grievous ones, as well as Dealer, and I mean, just the whole dungeon is pretty rough with Fortified Grievous. So this might be one to avoid. In terms of other dungeons, though, there's not too many fights that do like group-wide damage, but those are the ones that amp up in difficulty with Grievous active. The ones that just hit your tank, usually not too bad. That's a lot of boss fights in a lot of these dungeons, but like on Mistcaller, for instance, the intermission phases, if you're sitting in this intermission phase for 20 seconds, for 30 seconds, that's going to start being pretty bad. So actually consider moving your damage cooldowns, and especially defensive cooldowns, into those intermissions and press them early. Press them while you're at high health, rather than waiting until you're at 20% health. Because if you're 20% health and you press a defensive cooldown against Grievous, like, it's still bad. It's still going to be a pain. But if you press it when you're at 100% health, you might avoid getting even deep into Grievous in the first place, and mitigate a lot more damage that way. Plaguefall, this is one of the dungeons where, so killing the bosses really quickly is going to be your friend. If you let like Globgrog live a long time, then it'll be annoying. But if you just lust this thing, nuke it down, doesn't get a second slime cast, it only casts like 2 Plague Stomps, it won't get through too many of your defensives. So go for that strategy on this. Definitely pick up the Incinerator power before going to Dr. Ickis. That's a really good strategy. You should just do that every week by default, unless you're like really time pressured and you have a path that you think is faster, but it's so much safer to just get this this power, because this is where you get a lot of your damage, right? This drops Champion's Brand for everybody. That's a lot of stats on your damage dealers. Okay, Sanguine Depths. Sanguine Depths, you're going to want to overload Executor Tarvald with damage from the Lanterns. So assuming you have a Venthyr in your group, which will really help you this week, the way you do this is with the Lantern that's like right over here. And actually what you're going to want to do is probably kill off 1 extra pack before opening the Lantern, and then pull this back into the Lantern, right? Open the Lantern, pull the next pack into the Lantern, refresh your stacks, and then take that into Tarvald, and go into Tarvald with a nice long duration, high stack count buff from the Lanterns. Pair that with a Bloodlust with some cooldowns, and the boss will melt. If you don't do that, then this combination of affixes is really rough. The other thing about Tarvald is the scary adds on this fight are the 2nd and 3rd ad spawn. Those are ones that overlap with a Castigate cast. So what you want to do if that happens, when that happens, is if you're targeted with that Castigate, that's the moment to use immunities or defensives against that effect. Okay, Spires. This one, so there's a couple of inspiring mobs that beg to be crowd controlled in this dungeon. This is one of the chief examples of them, this Mender up here. Definitely don't just leave this in the pack with the Goliath and then, oh no, the Goliath starts casting and you're out of luck. What you can do, okay, so an advanced strategy, you know how we talked about inspiring, right? Your options are CC it, focus it, or do something crazy. One potential crazy option that works on packs like this is to knock the inspiring mob and then land a kick if there's like 1 vital kick. But this pack, you've got other annoying stuff going on, like Burden of Knowledge that you're going to want to prevent from casting. And by crowd controlling the Mender, you actually get the ability to then kill it later, potentially with, like, say, kill it with Varuth, and then dispel the imbued weapon off of it, pick that weapon up, and get that bonus damage either on Varuth or maybe even onto the first boss. So definitely the recommended strat for that pull. Necrotic Wake, inspiring, pretty annoying in here if you're trying to group up, a high finesse pull for weapons to work out well. If you're somebody that's trying to push a 29 Necrotic Wake this week, that's going to be something that really annoys you. If you're anybody else, just pull the dungeon in a nice, slow, methodical fashion, and the affix really shouldn't bother you too much. So this one, right, this Necromancer with inspiring is a little bit of pain if you're used to pre-crowd controlling the mage and then pulling this Necromancer. Instead, you need to pull the Necromancer first and then land a crowd control on the mage. This usually works out, though, because the mage just stands there and casts, so you can create that space between the two of them. And then you do get this Sorcerer free casting its Necrotic Bolts as well. It's not lethal. If you're scared of it, you can break this pull up, but that is kind of criminally inefficient. But it's up to you. It's for, you can do what you want with that. This dungeon is generally fairly lenient on the timer, although if you're breaking it up into 40 different pulls, then maybe it's not going to be. And then finally, Theater of Pain, big annoying dungeon with these affixes, especially this Zav wing. There's just a lot of group-wide damage, Fortified, Inspiring, Grievous, like on this pack, really big pain. So what you're going to want to do is, if you have a crowd control effect that works on the captain, fire it off, and that'll make your life infinitely easier. Some premium ones here are Death Knight Control Undead. If you have access to that, it's actually really nice to use that on the captain. Failing that, though, just any crowd control you can on it, and then pulling everything else out of its Inspiring and demoralizing, or Commanding Presence thing that reduces the AoE damage all the other mobs take. Because if these Arbalists are just shooting at you, they're not dying for a really long time because you have to focus the captain down first, and they're dealing extra damage with Fortified, they're putting everybody into Grievous range. It's actually a really nasty pull. So if you don't have a crowd control effect for this pull, use cooldowns on it. But the annoying part is kind of all the other mobs in here with Fortified Grievous also are going to be painful. So come into this dungeon with some idea of what you want to do with the Zav wing, because it's pain all the way through. Alright, so that's a quick look at the dungeons you've got ahead of you this week. Definitely not the greatest week for the pushing of keystones, but can be done. You can definitely get dungeons done at a reasonable level this week. If you went really hard 2 weeks ago, don't necessarily, you might be playing a key level lower than you were back then. But honestly, especially if you've gotten some gear upgrades, you can probably do them at the same level. It'll just feel a little bit tougher, but it is definitely doable. There's also a cool event going on from Raider.io this week, a Break the Meta event, where if your group is comprised solely of specs from like the bottom half of representation, you can read the full details about it on the site, then you can play for some prizes and try and push up some score this week for that. So that sounds like something you might qualify for. You might be interested in doing. Break out some wacky specs, or Havoc Demon Hunter. Havoc Demon Hunter actually counts. It's included in there because there's a rule that the lowest spec of each class gets in, even if it otherwise wouldn't. So yeah, maybe we'll even see Illidrat sneaking its way into some keys. We'll see. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the video. Good luck out there. It's not going to be the best week on the calendar, but it's probably not going to be the worst. We got some stormy weeks ahead of us. The time for Mythic Plus, Mythic Plus, this calendar is so weird. It's got like 2 great weeks, then this sort of desert, and then we got 2 pretty good weeks, and then it's a desert again. So it's a bit of a wild ride, but that's where we're at. So yeah, good luck out there. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. Check out my stream. Hit subscribe, ring that wacky bell. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.